The Great Hall of the Galactic Concord was the largest structure ever built by living hands. It floated at the center of Allurus Prime, a station world the size of a small moon, and inside it sat the representatives of more than 400 species from across the known galaxy. The ceiling was made of transparent crystal, and through it the stars burned cold and endless. The hall was shaped like a bowl, with rising rows of seats carved from white stone, and at the center there was a single platform where any species could stand and speak. On most days, the hall was filled with the low hum of diplomacy, trade agreements, border disputes, scientific grants, the comfortable noise of civilizations that had long ago forgotten what it felt like to be afraid. Today was different. Ambassador Tulin of the Valith stood on the central platform. And he was dying, not in the physical sense, though his body was failing him. The Valith were a delicate species. They stood barely 4 feet tall, with translucent skin that glowed softly from within, like lanterns made of living glass. Their bones were thin as bird bones. Their eyes were large and dark and wet, and they had no claws, no teeth worth mentioning, no armor of any kind. Evolution had given them something else instead. They were telepaths. They could feel the emotions of others, could share memories and thoughts across vast distances. They were scholars, poets, dreamers. They had never fought a war in their entire history, and now they were being slaughtered. Tulin had traveled for 9 days to reach Alurus Prime. He had not slept. He had barely eaten. His bioluminescent skin, in which should have glowed a soft and steady blue, was flickering like a candle in the wind. His hands shook as he gripped the edges of the speaking platform. Around him, 400 species watched and waited. He opened his mouth and his voice came out as a broken whisper that the hall's amplifiers carried to every corner. "My world is burning," he said. The hall went silent. 12 days ago, the Korvathi Pale Dominion entered our star system with a fleet of 2,000 warships. We sent messages of peace. We asked them what they wanted. We offered trade, knowledge, friendship. They did not respond. They simply began to fire. Tulin's hands tightened on the platform. His skin flickered faster. They destroyed our orbital stations first. 40,000 people lived on those stations. Teachers, scientists, children. They were gone in minutes. Then the Korvathi turned their weapons on our cities. They used plasma bombardment from orbit. Do you know what plasma bombardment does to a city? It does not explode. It melts. The buildings melt. The streets melt. The people. His voice broke. He stood there for a long moment, his whole body trembling, and the hall remained perfectly silent. "The people melt," he finished quietly. In the upper rows of the hall, in a small section near the back that was reserved for minor species, a woman in a dark military uniform sat very still. Her name was Captain Ria Vasquez, and she was the only human military officer assigned to Alurus Prime. She was 36 years old, with short black hair and dark eyes and a scar that ran along her jaw from a training accident years ago. She sat with her hands folded in her lap and her face completely blank, but behind that blank face something was happening. Something hot and dangerous was building in her chest like a fire looking for air. She had read the intelligence reports. She knew what the Korvathi were doing to the Valith. She had seen the satellite images of the burning cities, the rivers of molten glass where streets used to be, the dark shapes of refugee columns being strafed from the air. She had read about the camps, about what happened to the Valith who were captured instead of killed, and she had watched the Galactic Concord do absolutely nothing about it for 12 days. Down on the platform, Tulin was still speaking. He had pulled something from his robes. It was a small crystal sphere, and it pulsed with a faint light. "I know that words are not enough," Tulin said. "I know that many of you have never seen war. You do not understand what it means. So I have brought something with me. This sphere contains a telepathic recording. It holds the last moments of the city of Violunith, which was home to 2 million of my people. I was connected to them through our telepathic network when the bombardment began. I felt what they felt, and now I am going to share it with you so that you can feel it too." Several delegates shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The telepathic abilities of the Valith were well known, and a psychic projection of this kind, while not harmful, could be deeply unsettling. Tulin did not wait for permission. He crushed the sphere in his hand. The feeling hit the hall like a wave. It was not sound, though some species later described it that way. It was not light, though others said they saw flashes behind their eyes. It was pure emotion, raw and unfiltered, pouring out of that broken crystal and washing over every living being in the hall. First there was confusion, the simple, everyday confusion of ordinary people going about their ordinary lives when the sky suddenly turned white. Then there was fear, not the small fear of a startled animal, but the deep and drowning fear of a parent who looks up and sees fire falling from the sky toward their children. Then there was pain, pain beyond description, beyond language, beyond thought. The pain of bodies burning, of lungs filling with superheated air, of watching loved ones dissolve into light and ash. And beneath all of it, or threaded through every moment like a scream that would never end, there was a single desperate thought, shared by 2 million minds in their final seconds of existence. Help us, please, someone help us. The wave lasted only seconds, but it felt like hours. When it faded, the hall was in chaos. Delegates were screaming, weeping, clutching at their heads. Several had collapsed. Medical teams rushed forward. The air smelled of ozone and fear. Tulin stood at the center of it all, tears running down his glowing face, the broken crystal cutting into his palm and his blood dripping onto the white stone floor. "That is what is happening to my people," he said, and his voice was steady now, steady with the terrible calm of someone who has nothing left to lose. "Right now, Adawan, as we sit here in this beautiful hall and discuss trade agreements and border disputes, my people are dying, and I am asking you, all of you, every species in this concord, to help us. Please send your fleets. Stop this. Save what is left of us." The hall fell into a stunned and terrible silence. Then the politics began. The triumvirate of echoes was the ruling body of the Galactic Concord. It was made up of 3 elder species, the Silanth, the Morvathi, and the Kelun, who had founded the Concord thousands of years ago. They were old and wise and cautious, and they had built the longest period of peace the galaxy had ever known. They were also, Captain Vasquez thought, as she watched them deliberate, absolute cowards. The chief speaker of the triumvirate was a Silanth named Archon Keth. He was enormous, nearly 8 feet tall, and with a body like polished stone, and a voice that rumbled like distant thunder. He addressed the assembly with the careful words of someone who had been choosing careful words for centuries. "The Concord grieves for the Valeth," he said. "What we have felt today will not be forgotten, but we must be guided by reason, not emotion. The Corvathi Pale Dominion operates outside Concord jurisdiction. Their territory is beyond our borders. To send a military fleet into sovereign space would be an act of war, and it could destabilize the entire galactic order." Tulin stared at him. "They are killing children," he said. "And that is a tragedy beyond measure," Archon Keth replied smoothly. "We will send diplomatic envoys. We will impose economic sanctions. We will condemn this action in the strongest possible terms." "Sanctions," Tulin repeated. The word came out of his mouth like something rotten. "My cities are ash, and you offer me sanctions." The debate continued for hours. Species after species rose to speak. Some argued passionately for intervention. The Fennerai, a small but fierce species with a strong military tradition, offered to send their own fleet. But the Fennerai had only 60 warships, and the Corvathi had thousands. Other species expressed sympathy but cited the same concerns as the triumvirate. The risk was too great. The precedent was too dangerous. War was too costly. Captain Vasquez sat through all of it. She listened to every speech, every excuse, every carefully worded expression of concern that amounted to nothing. And the fire in her chest grew hotter and hotter until she thought it might burn through her ribs. She understood what was happening. She had studied human history, and she knew this pattern. She knew what it looked like when civilized people decided that someone else's suffering was not their problem. She had seen the photographs from the old Earth Wars, the camps and the mass graves and the smoking ruins. And she had read the speeches that came afterward, the ones that always started with "never again" and always ended with it happening again somewhere else. When the vote finally came, Captain Vasquez already knew the result. The motion to intervene militarily in the Valeth system failed. 312 species voted against, 88 voted in favor. The rest abstained. One Tulen stood on the platform for a long time after the vote. The hall slowly emptied around him. Delegates filed out, murmuring to each other, already moving on to the next item on their agenda. Some of them could not meet his eyes. Most did not try. An old figure approached him. It was Archon Saluma, a member of the Triumvirate who had voted in favor of intervention. She was ancient even by the standards of her long-lived species, and she moved slowly, leaning on a staff of twisted metal. Her eyes, set deep in a face of folded gray skin, were sharp and sad. "I am sorry," she said to Tulin. "I fought for you. It was not enough." "Then my people will die," Tulin said. He said it simply, as a fact, the way one might say that water is wet or that stars are hot. Saluma was quiet for a moment. Then she leaned closer. "There is one possibility," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "There is a species in this Concord, a young species. They were admitted only 12 cycles ago, and most of the elder races do not take them seriously. They are seen as primitives, barbarians, curiosities from a world so hostile that no sane species would evolve there." Tulin looked at her with exhausted eyes. "What species?" "They call themselves humans," Saluma said. "They come from a Class 12 death world. Do you know what that means? Their planet is a nightmare. Crushing gravity, extreme temperatures, constant seismic activity, an atmosphere full of corrosive oxygen, and every living thing on their world, from the smallest microbe to the largest predator, is engaged in a permanent war for survival. They evolved in that hell. They did not just survive it, or they conquered it. They became the apex predator of a world that was designed to kill everything on it." "And you think they can help us?" Tulen asked. Saluma's expression was complicated. There was hope in it, and fear, and something that might have been awe. "I think they are the only ones who might," she said. "But you must understand something, Ambassador. If you ask the humans for help, you are not asking for diplomats or peacekeepers. You are asking for warriors, real warriors, the kind that the galaxy has not seen in thousands of years. They do not fight with rules and formations and careful strategies. They fight with everything they have, everything they are, and they do not stop until the enemy is destroyed or they are dead. Why, inviting them to your war is not the same as inviting anyone else." "My people are dying," Tulin said. "I would invite the devil himself." Saluma nodded slowly. "Then look up," she said. "Third section from the left, near the back. The small delegation in the dark uniforms. That is the human section." Tulen looked up. The human section was nearly empty. There was only one person there, a woman with short black hair and dark eyes and a scar along her jaw. She had not left when the other delegates filed out. She had stayed watching him, and when his eyes found hers across the vast distance of the hall, she did not look away. Captain Ria Vasquez looked down at the broken ambassador of a dying world, and something passed between them. It was not telepathy. Humans were not telepaths. But there is a language older than words, honey, older than thought, and it is the language of one living being recognizing the pain of another and deciding in that moment that something must be done. Vasquez gave a single, slow nod. Then she pulled out her communication device and began typing a coded message. The encryption was military grade, the kind that would take even the Concord's best analysts years to break. The message was short. It was addressed to United Earth Stellar Command, Priority Alpha, eyes only for the Admiralty. It read, "They're going to let an entire species die. The Valeth need us. Recommend immediate mobilization. The Korvathi Pale Dominion has approximately 2,000 warships in the Valeth system, with an estimated total fleet strength of 8,000. They are committing genocide. Concord has voted against intervention. Watch, we are the only ones left." She paused, then added a final line. "These people have no one. Send everything." She hit send. The message traveled at faster than light speeds through the Concord's relay network, bouncing from station to station across thousands of light years until it reached a small blue planet orbiting an unremarkable yellow star in an unfashionable arm of the Milky Way. Earth. On that planet, in a bunker buried deep beneath a mountain range, a communications officer received the message and immediately flagged it for priority review. Within minutes, it was on the desk of Admiral Jonah Mwangi, commander of the United Earth Stellar Command. He was a tall man in his 60s, with gray hair and steady hands and eyes that had seen more than most. He read the message twice. Then he read the attached intelligence reports, were the satellite images, the casualty estimates, the description of what plasma bombardment did to living bodies. He sat in his chair for a long time, very still. Then he picked up his phone and made a single call. "This is Admiral Mwangi," he said. "Activate Protocol Lighthouse. I want the War Council assembled within the hour. Full mobilization authority. And get me everything we have on the Korvathi Pale Dominion. Everything." He hung up and looked out the window of his office. Outside, the sun was setting over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of red and gold. It was beautiful. Earth was always beautiful, even after everything humanity had done to it and everything it had done to them. Somewhere out there, far beyond those mountains and that sky and those stars just beginning to appear in the darkening heavens, a species of gentle telepaths was being burned alive, and 400 civilizations had decided it was not their problem. Admiral Mwangi stood up. He put on his uniform jacket. He straightened his medals. "It's our problem now," he said to no one. And on Alurus Prime, in the empty hall of the Galactic Concord, Tayulan sat alone on the cold stone floor and wept. He did not know what was coming. He did not know that on a distant world the forges were already beginning to wake, that soldiers were being called from their beds, that ships were being loaded with weapons and fuel and fury. He did not know that the single nod of a woman with a scar on her jaw had set something in motion that would shake the galaxy to its foundations. All he knew was that his people were dying and no one had helped. But someone had heard, someone had listened. And in the silence of the empty hall, if he had reached out with his telepathic gift, if he had stretched his mind across the impossible distance of space to that small blue planet, he would have felt something strange and terrifying and wonderful. He would have felt the slow, steady heartbeat of a species that had been born in fire and raised in blood, a species that had fought its way out of the darkness not once but 1,000 times, a species that had looked into the face of extinction and spit in its eye and kept going. He would have felt humanity waking up, and if he had known what that meant, if he had truly understood what happens when humans decide that something matters, he might have stopped weeping, because help was coming, not the careful, measured, diplomatic kind of help that the Concord offered. So not sanctions and strongly worded letters and expressions of concern. Something else entirely. Something the galaxy had not seen in a very long time. Something with teeth. The emergency session of the Triumvirate of Echoes was held in a sealed chamber deep within the core of Alurus Prime, far from the Grand Hall and its crystal ceiling and its 400 watching delegations. The chamber was small and round and lit by a single cold light that hung from the ceiling like a dying star. There were no windows. There were no decorations. This was a room where uncomfortable truths were spoken, and it had been designed to contain them. Archon Keth of the Silenth sat at the head of the table. He was flanked by the other two members of the Triumvirate, Archon Pelum of the Morvathi, a spindly creature whose body was made of interlocking plates of biological metal, and Archon Dreenath of the Keluan, a massive, slug-like being whose moist skin constantly secreted a thin layer of protective mucus. Together, the three of them represented the oldest and most powerful species in the Concord, and they had ruled the galaxy for the better part of 6,000 years. Today, they were worried. "The humans have accepted the Valith request for bilateral military aid," said the intelligence officer standing before them. She was a Fennery, small and sharp-featured, with fur the color of burnt copper. "Ambassador Tulin made the formal request 18 hours ago. The human government responded within 4 hours. They have already begun mobilization." Archon Keth's stone face showed no expression. "Mobilization of what, exactly?" "The humans have a small patrol fleet, a few hundred ships at most. The Korvathi Pale Dominion has 8,000 warships. This is not a serious military concern." "With respect, Archon," said the intelligence officer, "our data on human military capability may be incomplete. The humans have been reluctant to share full details of their fleet strength, and our observation networks in their territory are limited. What we do know is that they have been building at a rate that exceeds our initial projections." "Building what?" "Warships, weapons platforms, troop transports, and something they call dreadnoughts, which are capital ships measuring between 7 and 9 kilometers in length. Archon Pelium's metal plates clinked softly as he shifted. 9 kilometers? That is larger than our own flagship class. Yes, so Archon. Keth waved a massive hand dismissively. Even so, a few large ships do not change the fundamental mathematics. The Korvathi outnumber them many times over. The humans are being foolish. They will send their little fleet, it will be destroyed, and we will have another diplomatic crisis to manage. Is there anything else? There is, said a voice from the doorway. Archon Seluma entered the chamber slowly, leaning on her metal staff. She looked older than usual, as if the weight of what she carried had aged her overnight. In her free hand, she held a data tablet, and she placed it on the table with a soft click that somehow silenced the room. I have prepared a dossier, she said, on the humans, a comprehensive analysis of their species, their history, their biology, and their military doctrine. I prepared it because I believe this body is making a catastrophic error of judgment, and I want the reasons for that error to be clearly documented before events prove me right. Archon Keth's rumbling voice carried a note of irritation. Seluma, you have always had a flair for drama. The humans are a minor species. They have been members of this Concord for 12 cycles. They contribute nothing of significance to our economy, our science, or our culture. They are curiosities. What could you possibly have found that would change that assessment? Everything, Seluma said. She activated the data tablet, and a holographic display bloomed above the table. Let me begin with their homeworld. The display showed a planet, blue and green and white, swirled with clouds. She beautiful in the way that all living worlds were beautiful from a distance. But the data that scrolled alongside the image told a different story. Earth, Seluma said. Classification, Deathworld, Category 12. That is the highest category in our system. To put it in context, most species in this Concord evolved on worlds classified between Category 1 and Category 4. The Fenari, who are considered one of our hardier species, evolved on a Category 6 world. Category 12 is the point at which our models predict that complex life should be impossible. She let that sink in. Earth has a gravity of 9.8 meters per second squared, which is nearly twice the galactic average for inhabited worlds. Its atmosphere is 21% oxygen, which is a corrosive and highly flammable gas. When its axial tilt produces extreme seasonal variations, including periods where large portions of the surface are covered in frozen water. It has active plate tectonics, which means the ground itself moves, producing earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and tsunamis. Its weather systems include hurricanes, tornadoes, and electrical storms of enormous power. She paused and looked around the table. And that is just the planet. The life that evolved on Earth is even more remarkable. Every ecological niche is occupied by organisms engaged in a constant war for survival. Predators, parasites, venomous insects, toxic plants, microorganisms that invade the body and consume it from within. The humans have a word for this. They call it the food chain, and the humans sit at the top of it. Archon Dreenath's mucus-covered body rippled. How? They have no natural weapons, no claws, no venom, no armor plating. They are soft-bodied and slow. They are not slow, Seluma said quietly. They are, in fact, one of the most efficient long-distance runners in Earth's evolutionary history. Their ancestors hunted by a method called persistence hunting. They would choose a prey animal, often something much faster and stronger than themselves, and they would simply follow it for hours, for days, under the burning sun, across open plains, through forests and over mountains. The prey would sprint away, and the humans would not sprint. They would walk. They would jog. They would keep moving, never stopping, never resting, while their prey exhausted itself. Eventually, the animal would collapse, its body broken by heat and exhaustion, and the humans would walk up to it and kill it. The room was very quiet. They do not stop, Seluma said. That is the first thing you must understand about humans. They do not stop. They are not the fastest species. They are not the strongest. They are not the most intelligent, though they are very intelligent. What they are is relentless. They evolved on a world that tried to kill them every single day, and they responded by refusing to die. They refused so completely, so absolutely, that they eventually conquered every ecosystem on their planet, survived multiple extinction-level events, and developed technology sophisticated enough to leave their world and reach the stars. She changed the display. Now it showed images from human history, and they were not pleasant. But here is where it becomes truly important, she said. Touring in their military history, the images scrolled past stone weapons, bronze swords, iron armor, gunpowder, rifles, machine guns, tanks, aircraft, ships the size of small cities, bristling with weapons. And then the images that made every being in the room go still. A mushroom cloud rising over a city. The humans discovered how to split the atom, Saluma said. They learned how to release the fundamental energy that holds matter together. And what did they do with this knowledge? Did they use it for power generation? For scientific research? Eventually, yes. But first, they used it to build a bomb. And then they used that bomb on themselves, on their own species. They dropped it on a city full of their own kind and killed 80,000 people in a single flash of light. She let the image hang in the air. And then, she said softly, Yarn, they built more. They built thousands of them. They pointed them at each other across their own planet and lived for decades with the knowledge that at any moment, any one of their leaders could press a button and end all life on their world. They called this period the Cold War. They stood at the edge of extinction, stared into the abyss, and did not flinch. They survived it. They survived all of it. Every war, every plague, every disaster, every self-inflicted wound. They are still here. Archon Keth shifted his massive body. This is disturbing history, Saluma, but I fail to see how it is relevant. We are discussing a minor border conflict with the Korvathi. The humans may be violent, but violence without numbers is meaningless. Is it? Saluma said. She changed the display again. Could let me show you their military doctrine. The display showed diagrams, battle plans, tactical analyses. Saluma walked through them methodically. Most species in this Concord fight according to predictable patterns. Fleet formations, established rules of engagement, symmetrical warfare. The Korvathi are a perfect example. They are powerful, yes, but they are rigid. Their fleet operates on a strict hierarchical command structure. Orders flow from the top down. Individual captains have almost no autonomy. If you disrupt the command chain, the entire fleet becomes confused. The humans fight differently. Their doctrine is built around a concept they call mission command. Each unit, from the largest fleet to the smallest squad, is given an objective and the freedom to achieve it by whatever means they see fit. They improvise. They adapt. They change their plans in the middle of a battle based on conditions on the ground. They are, in a very real sense, an army of generals. She pulled up another set of data. They also fight dirty. They use deception, psychological warfare, electronic warfare, sabotage, assassination, and unconventional tactics that no species in this Concord has employed in thousands of years. They will fake a retreat to lure an enemy into a trap. They will sacrifice a small force to distract an enemy while the main force strikes from an unexpected direction. They will target supply lines, communication networks, and leadership structures before engaging the main body of an enemy fleet. They do not fight the army in front of them. They fight the system that supports that army. She paused and took a breath. But the most important thing, the thing that I need all of you to understand is this. She brought up a final image. It was a photograph from Earth's history, old and grainy and black and white. It showed a group of human soldiers, thin and ragged and filthy, standing in the ruins of a destroyed city. They were exhausted. Some of them were wounded, but every single one of them was standing, and every single one of them was looking at the camera with the same expression. It was not hatred. It was not bloodlust. It was something far more dangerous. It was determination. The humans have a concept, Saluma said. They call it protective aggression. It is the idea that when something they love is threatened, their capacity for violence does not simply increase. It transforms. It becomes something unlimited. something that does not respond to cost-benefit analysis, that does not care about odds or numbers or probability of success. When a human decides that something or someone is theirs to protect, they will fight with a fury that has no ceiling. They will die before they stop. They will take the enemy with them. And they will make the cost of threatening what they love so high that no rational being would ever do it again. She looked around the room. The Valeth have asked the humans for help. The humans have said yes. And right now, at this very moment, on that little blue planet on the other side of the galaxy, a species of Deathworld survivors is preparing to go to war for people they have never met, for a world they have never seen, for no reason other than the fact that someone asked them for help, and they could not say no. She pointed at the holographic display of the human fleet data. "You are counting their ships," she said. "You should be counting their reasons." The room was silent for a long time. Then Archon Keth spoke. "You paint a vivid picture, Saluma, but the mathematics have not changed. The Korvathi have 8,000 warships. The humans have, at most, a fraction of that number. Passion and determination are admirable qualities, but they do not deflect plasma beams. The humans will go to the Valeth system, they will fight, and they will be destroyed. And then the Concord will be left to manage the aftermath." "You are wrong," Saluma said. "I have been governing this galaxy since before your species learned to write." Keth replied coldly. "I think I understand military mathematics." "You understand the mathematics of civilized warfare," Saluma said. "The humans do not fight civilized warfare. They fight total war. They commit everything. Every ship, every soldier, every factory, every resource, every ounce of creativity and desperation and stubborn refusal to accept defeat. You have never seen anything like it. None of us have. Not in 6,000 years." Keth stood. His enormous body unfolded like a mountain rising from the earth, and when he spoke, his voice filled the chamber like an earthquake. "Enough. The Concord's position is clear. We will not intervene. If the humans wish to throw their lives away on a futile gesture, that is their right. This session is concluded." He turned and walked out. The other two Archons followed, Peluum clicking softly, Dreenath leaving a trail of mucus on the polished floor. The intelligence officer gathered her materials and left without a word. Saluma stood alone in the empty chamber, leaning on her staff, staring at the holographic display that still floated above the table. The image of the human soldiers in the ruins of the destroyed city stared back at her. "You fool," she said softly. "You absolute fools." Far away on the other side of the galaxy, the thing that the triumvirate had dismissed was already in motion. Admiral Jonah Mwangi stood at the center of the war room, deep beneath the mountains of East Africa. Around him sat the Joint Chiefs of the United Earth Stellar Command, 12 men and women who represented the combined military power of the human species. They had been awake for 30 hours. The table in front of them was covered in holographic displays showing fleet positions, supply chains, production schedules, and intelligence reports. "Here is the situation," Mwangi said. His voice was calm and even, the way it always was, but every person in the room could feel the steel underneath it. "The Valeth are a pacifist species with no military capability. They are being systematically exterminated by the Korvathi Pale Dominion. The Galactic Concord has voted against intervention. We are the only option." He brought up a display of the Valeth star system. The Korvathi currently have approximately 2,000 warships in the system, with a total fleet strength of around 8,000. They have orbital superiority, ground forces on the surface, and a well-established supply chain. Our intelligence estimates suggest that at current rates of bombardment, the Valeth will be effectively extinct within 60 to 90 standard days. He looked around the table. "I have already authorized full mobilization under Protocol Lighthouse. The question before this council is not whether we go. We are going. The question is how." The room erupted into discussion. Plans were proposed, debated, modified, and discarded. Logistics officers calculated fuel requirements and transit times. Intelligence analysts presented everything they knew about the Korvathi, their fleet composition, their tactical doctrine, their command structure, their weaknesses. And as the hours passed, a plan began to take shape. It was ambitious. It was risky. Several of the Joint Chiefs called it insane. Mwangi called it necessary. We will bring everything we have, he said. The combined expeditionary armada, 1,200 warships, including all four dreadnought-class vessels, full fighter complements, electronic warfare frigates, stealth destroyers, troop transports with 40,000 Marines in full combat exoskeletons. And I want the reserve fleet, another 400 ships, to follow on a separate course and take up position in the outer system under total emissions blackout. Sir, said one of the Joint Chiefs, a woman with silver hair and cybernetic eyes, that is our entire fleet. If we commit everything and fail, Earth will be undefended. If we commit less and fail, Mwangi replied, the Valeth will be dead and Earth will still be undefended, because any species that can watch a genocide and do nothing does not deserve to be defended. The room went quiet. Mobilization begins immediately, Mwangi said. I want the fleet assembled and ready to jump within 40 days. Every ship, every soldier, every bullet. We are going to cross half the galaxy, and we are going to face a fleet that outnumbers us 8-1, and we are going to win. Any questions? There were no questions. On every human colony, on every station, on every ship, the call went out. Reservists were pulled from their homes and their jobs. Factories that had been producing consumer goods switched overnight to producing weapons and ammunition and armor. Shipyards that had been building merchant vessels began bolting weapons onto their hulls. Scientists and engineers worked around the clock, refining weapons, improving shields, developing new electronic warfare systems. And the soldiers came. They came from every nation and every colony and every walk of life. They came from farms and cities and space stations. They came from offices and factories and schools. They were old and young, men and women, in every color and every background, and every single one of them had heard the same story, the story of the Valeth, the story of 2 million people melted in their homes while the galaxy watched and did nothing. They did not need to be convinced. They did not need to be inspired. They were human and someone needed help, and that was enough. Meanwhile, deep in the Korvathi Pale Dominion, in the war room of the massive command vessel Fist of Purity, the Korvathi High Commander received an intelligence report. His name was Overlord Keithan, and he was the most decorated military leader in Korvathi history. He had conquered 11 worlds and subjugated 6 species. He was tall and broad, covered in thick plates of natural armor, with 4 arms and a face like a blade. What is this? He asked, looking at the report. A communication intercept, Overlord, his aide replied, from the humans. It was broadcast in the clear, unencrypted, on all standard frequencies. Cathayan read the message. It was short. We are coming for the Valeth. Move or be moved. Cathayan stared at it for a moment. Then he laughed. It was a harsh grating sound, like metal scraping against stone. The humans, he said, those soft little creatures from that unremarkable little planet, they think they can threaten the Pale Dominion? Should we increase our defenses, Overlord? Cathayan deleted the message with a casual swipe of his clawed hand. No, he said. Let them come. Let them bring their little fleet and their little soldiers. The Valeth will be dead before they arrive, and if they are foolish enough to engage us, they will join them. The humans are nothing. Aren't they our insects? He turned back to the tactical display showing the ongoing bombardment of Valethar. Continue the operation, he said. Increase bombardment intensity by 20%. I want this finished. His aide saluted and left. Cathayan sat alone in his war room, surrounded by the holographic light of a dying world, and he smiled the cold smile of a predator who has never been challenged. He did not know what was coming. None of them did. Across the galaxy, the forges of Earth burned day and night. Ships were loaded with weapons and fuel and food and medicine. Soldiers wrote letters to their families and packed their bags and said goodbye. Admiral Mwangi stood on the bridge of the dreadnought unconquered and looked out at the assembling fleet. And for a moment, just a moment, he allowed himself to feel the weight of what he was about to do. 40,000 soldiers, 1,200 ships. He was about to lead them across the galaxy to fight an enemy that outnumbered them 8-1, for a species most of them had never heard of, on a world none of them had ever seen. He thought about the telepathic recording that Captain Vasquez had included in her transmission. He had watched it with the sound on. He had heard the screams. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Then he opened them, and the weight was gone, replaced by something harder and brighter and infinitely more dangerous. All ships, he said into the fleet-wide channel. This is Admiral Mwangi. Set course for the Vela system. Jump in 48 hours. He paused. They're waiting for us. Well, let's not keep them waiting. 6 weeks had passed since the Galactic Concord voted to do nothing, and in those 6 weeks, the Korvathi Pale Dominion had tightened its grip on Velathar like a fist closing around a throat. The orbital stations were gone. The communications network was gone. The planetary defense grid, what little of it there had been, was gone. The Korvathi had established a blockade around the planet, a ring of warships so thick that not even light seemed to escape it. Refugee ships that tried to break through were shot down. Relief convoys sent by sympathetic minor species were turned back at gunpoint or destroyed outright. On the surface, the situation was worse. 12 of Velathar's 20 major cities had been reduced to glass and ash by orbital plasma bombardment, and the remaining 8 had been occupied by Korvathi ground forces, who moved through the streets in heavy armored vehicles, rounding up survivors and marching them to holding camps on the outskirts of the cities. The Veleth, with no weapons and no soldiers and no experience of violence, could do nothing but comply and hope and wait for help that did not come. The Concord sent diplomatic envoys. The Korvathi sent them back in pieces. The Concord imposed economic sanctions. The Korvathi did not notice. The Concord issued a formal statement of condemnation. The Korvathi used it as kindling. And across the galaxy, 400 species watched the live feeds from Velathar and shook their heads and murmured about what a terrible shame it all was. And then they went back to their trade agreements and their border disputes and their comfortable lives. Ambassador Tyolan had returned to Velathar. He had done so against the advice of everyone he knew, sneaking through the blockade on a tiny shuttle that was barely large enough to hold him and flying through gaps in the Korvathi sensor net that were measured in seconds. He had crashed the shuttle in a forest outside the city of Maluvan, the last major city that had not been completely occupied, and he had walked through the darkness to find his people. He found them hiding, in basements, in caves, in the tunnels beneath the old university. Thousands of Veleth huddled together in the dark, their bioluminescent skin dimmed to nothing, afraid to glow because the glow could be seen by Korvathi patrols. Children clung to their parents. And when the old and the sick lay on cold stone floors, the telepathic network that had once connected the entire species was shattered, reduced to fragile whispers between small groups of survivors. Tulin moved among them and told them that help was coming. He told them about the humans. He told them that a species from a distant world had heard their cry and answered. They looked at him with hollow eyes and said nothing. They had heard promises before, and then, on the 43rd day since the vote, the sky changed. The first sign was a ripple in space itself. The Korvathi sensors detected it before anyone else did. A distortion in the fabric of faster-than-light space, like the bow wave of a ship pushing through water, except this wave was enormous. It was the kind of distortion that a very large number of ships would create if they all dropped out of FTL travel at the same time. The Korvathi fleet commander, a sub-overlord named Thraval, looked at his sensor display and frowned. "What is that?" he asked. His sensor officer studied the readings. "Multiple FTL exit signatures, sir. Many ships. They are emerging from faster than light at the edge of the system." "How many?" The sensor officer's voice went quiet. "I am reading 1,200 signatures, sir, and 4 of them are very, very large." The human fleet dropped out of FTL like a wall of iron emerging from the void. 1,200 warships, arranged not in the neat geometric formations that galactic species preferred, but in loose, flexible groups that shifted and flowed like schools of fish. Maka destroyers and corvettes darted around the flanks. Electronic warfare frigates pulsed with jamming signals. Carrier groups sat at the center, already launching fighters in waves of hundreds. And at the heart of the fleet, moving with the slow and terrible grace of sea creatures from the deep ocean, were the 4 dreadnoughts. The Unconquered, the Defiant, the Remembrance, the Last Argument. Each one was 9 kilometers long, a mountain of armor and weapons that dwarfed anything the Korvathi had ever built. Their hulls were dark gray, almost black, and along their sides, painted in white letters, 10 stories tall, were their names. Sub-Overlord Thraval stared at his display. He had expected the humans to come. Overlord Kethan had told him they would come, and he had told him they would be easy to destroy. A small fleet from a small species, nothing more. This was not a small fleet. Open a channel to the Overlord, Thraval said, and his voice was very calm in the way that voices are calm when the person speaking has not yet fully understood how much trouble they are in. Before the channel could connect, a transmission cut through every Korvathi frequency. It was not encrypted. It was broadcast in the clear, in perfect Korvathi, and it came from the human flagship. This is Admiral Jonah Mwangi of the United Earth Stellar Command, commanding the Combined Expeditionary Armada. I am addressing the Korvathi Pale Dominion forces currently occupying the Valeth system. You are engaged in the systematic extermination of a sentient species. This is an act of genocide, and it ends now. A pause. Gunnet, you have 1 standard hour to withdraw all forces from the Valeth system. Any Korvathi vessel that remains after that hour will be treated as a hostile combatant and engaged with all available force. Any Korvathi vessel that fires upon civilian targets during withdrawal will be destroyed immediately. There will be no negotiation. There will be no extension. You have 1 hour. Another pause, shorter. This is your only warning. The transmission ended. Sub-Overlord Thraval contacted Overlord Kethan, who was still aboard the Fist of Purity in the outer system. Kethan listened to the recording of the human transmission and laughed the same harsh laugh he had laughed weeks ago. 1 hour, he said. These creatures are amusing. Hold position. Let the hour pass. Then destroy them. The hour passed. Admiral Mwangi stood on the bridge of the Unconquered and watched the clock count down to 0. Around him, his bridge crew was silent, every one of them at their stations, every one of them ready. The displays showed the Korvathi fleet, 2,000 warships arranged in a defensive formation around Valethar, with the blockade ring tightening and ground forces still active on the surface. The clock hit 0. Admiral, said his tactical officer, the hour is up. Korvathi forces have not moved. Mwangi nodded. He had not expected them to. All ship, he said, execute Operation Wolfpack. God be with us. The battle began not with a charge, but with a whisper. The first thing the Korvathi noticed was that their sensors began to malfunction. The 1,200 human ships on their displays suddenly became 10,000. While ghost signatures appeared everywhere, flooding the Korvathi sensor net with false contacts. Ships that were not there seemed to attack from every direction. Missile salvos that did not exist triggered point defense systems, wasting ammunition on empty space. While the Korvathi were chasing ghosts, the real attack came from below. A wolf pack of 30 human corvettes, led by the destroyer SS Javi Guadalcanal, under the command of Captain Ria Vasquez, had used the sensor confusion to drop beneath the plane of the Korvathi formation. They had been running on minimal power, drifting in the cold dark like submarines beneath an ocean of stars, and now they surged upward into the belly of the Korvathi blockade ring. Their target was the orbital bombardment platforms, the weapons that the Korvathi were using to burn Valeth cities from space. There were 12 of them, massive structures bristling with plasma cannons, each one capable of turning a city to glass in minutes. Vasquez hit them like a knife through the ribs. The Guadalcanal's weapons were smaller than the Korvathi guns, but they were precise, and Vasquez knew exactly where to aim. Human intelligence analysts had spent weeks studying every scan, every photograph, every scrap of data they could find on Korvathi weapons platforms, and they had identified the weak points. Power conduits, cooling systems, ammunition feeds, the places where a single well-aimed shot could cause a chain reaction. The first bombardment platform exploded in a blossom of white fire. Then the second, then the third. The Korvathi reacted with fury, but not with coordination. Their hierarchical command structure meant that every response had to be approved by Sub-Overlord Thraval, and Thraval was struggling to make sense of a battlefield that had dissolved into chaos. By the time he issued orders to pursue the Wolfpack, Vasquez had already destroyed 6 platforms and was weaving through the wreckage at speeds that the Korvathi could not match. Meanwhile, the main human fleet engaged. It was nothing like the battles the Korvathi were used to. Galactic warfare, as practiced by most Concord species, was a stately affair. Fleets faced each other in parallel lines, exchange fire at range, and the side with more ships and bigger guns usually won. It was predictable. It was orderly. It was civilized. The humans did not fight like this. They fought like wolves. Small groups of ships, 5 or 10 at a time. It would dash forward, strike a section of the Korvathi line, and pull back before the Korvathi could respond. Other groups would hit from the sides, others from behind. The attacks came from everywhere and nowhere, unpredictable and relentless, and every attack targeted the same things: command ships, communication relays, sensor arrays. The humans were not trying to destroy the Korvathi fleet ship by ship. They were trying to blind it, deafen it, and cut off its head. And it was working. The Korvathi captains, trained to follow orders from above, found themselves suddenly alone. Their command channels were jammed with static and false signals. Their sensors showed a battlefield that made no sense. Some captains panicked and broke formation. Others held position but could not coordinate with their neighbors. The beautiful, irrigid Korvathi formation began to crack. Admiral Mwangi watched the battle unfold from the Bridge of the Unconquered and made adjustments with the calm precision of a surgeon. He moved his wolf packs like chess pieces, probing the cracks in the Korvathi line and driving them wider. When a Korvathi captain showed initiative and tried to reorganize his section, Mwangi sent a strike group to destroy that captain's ship specifically. When a group of Korvathi ships tried to concentrate their fire on a damaged human vessel, Mwangi had 3 other groups attack them from the flanks. It was not a battle of ships against ships. It was a battle of minds. Mwangi's mind against Thurval's mind. And Mwangi's mind was faster. Back at the bombardment platforms, Vasquez and her wolf pack had destroyed 9 of the 12. But the last 3 were the most heavily defended, and the Korvathi had finally managed to redirect a squadron of warships to protect them. The Guadalcanal had taken heavy damage. Her port side was torn open, atmosphere bleeding into space. Her main engine was operating at 40%. Half her weapons were offline. Vasquez stood on her bridge with blood running down her face from a cut above her eye. Her helmet had cracked when a bulkhead exploded, and a piece of shrapnel had sliced her forehead open. She did not seem to notice. "Target the 10th platform," she said. "Concentrate fire on the cooling system, and someone get me a damage report. Captain, we have hull breaches on decks 3 through 7. Main reactor is holding, but secondary power is failing. We have lost contact with engineering section B. Estimated casualties." "I didn't ask for casualties. I asked for a damage report. Can we still fight?" "Yes, ma'am." "Then we still fight." The Guadalcanal and her surviving corvettes punched through the Korvathi screen around the 10th platform. 2 corvettes were lost, burning and spinning into the void, their crews dead before they could eject. But the platform went down, its cooling system ruptured, its plasma cannons cooking themselves in their own heat. The 11th platform followed, and then the 12th. The orbital bombardment of Valethar stopped. On the surface of the planet, in the ruins of the city of Melivan, the Valeth, who had been cowering in underground shelters for weeks, felt the ground stop shaking. The terrible vibrations of plasma impacts, which had become the constant drumbeat of their existence, simply ceased. They looked at each other in the dim glow of their weakened bioluminescence and dared to hope. Then the sky opened and the humans came down. Drop pods fell from orbit like metal rain. Each one contained a squad of human marines in full combat exoskeletons, armored suits that amplified their already formidable strength and allowed them to operate in the heavy gravity of their homeworld. Gravity that was crushing for most galactic species. The Korvathi ground forces, bred for lighter worlds, moved like they were wading through thick mud. The humans moved like they were born here, because in a sense they were. Earth's gravity was higher than Valethar's. The humans were not just fighting on level ground. They were fighting downhill. The Marines hit the ground running, literally. They emerged from their drop pods and sprinted through the streets of Melovan, engaging Korvathi patrols with a speed and ferocity that the alien soldiers had never encountered. The Korvathi were physically larger, with natural armor plating and forearms, each one ending in razor-sharp claws. They were formidable warriors by any standard. The humans did not care. They fought in small, tight teams that moved through the rubble like water through cracks. They communicated with hand signals and short-clipped radio calls. They set ambushes around corners and in collapsed buildings. They used grenades to flush the Korvathi out of cover and precision rifle fire to put them down. When their weapons jammed or ran empty, they fought with knives and fists in the edges of their armored gauntlets, and they protected the civilians. Now that was the part that Tulin would never forget, for as long as he lived. The human Marines did not just fight the Kravathi, they shielded the Valith. They put their armored bodies between the alien soldiers and the glowing, trembling refugees. They carried injured Valith to safety on their backs. They gave their own food rations to starving children. They set up defensive perimeters around the shelters and told the Valith, in broken but earnest attempts at their language, that they were safe now. Tulen watched a human Marine take 3 plasma bolts to the chest. The impacts knocked him backward, melting through the outer layer of his armor and scorching the skin beneath. The Marine fell. Tylen felt a stab of grief, thinking the soldier was dead. Then the Marine got back up. And he got back up with the plasma burns still smoking on his chest, with pain that would have killed most species through shock alone. And he raised his weapon and kept firing. He stood over a group of Valith children who were crying in the ruins of what had once been a school, and he fought. He fought until his weapon ran dry, and then he picked up a piece of broken masonry the size of his head and threw it at a Korvathi soldier with enough force to crack the alien's armor plating. Tayulin, standing in the shadow of a collapsed building, reached out with his telepathic gift. He could not help himself. He had to understand. He had to know what drove these creatures, what fuel burned inside them that allowed them to absorb punishment that would kill any other species and keep fighting. He touched the Marine's mind, and he recoiled. It was not what he expected. He had expected rage. He had expected hatred, the blind red fury of a predator in the grip of its killing instinct. That was what the Valith had always imagined when they thought of violent species: mindless aggression, bloodlust, savagery. What he found was something completely different. There was anger, yes, but it was not blind or mindless. It was focused, controlled, directed like a blade. And beneath the anger, powering it like a reactor core, was something that Tulin recognized instantly, because it was the one emotion that the Valith of all species understood better than anyone. Love. It was love. Fierce, burning, desperate love. Love for the squad, for the brothers and sisters fighting beside him. Love for the mission, for the sacred duty of protecting those who could not protect themselves. Love for people he had never met, whose language he could not speak, whose world he had never seen before today. He loved them. He loved them the way a parent loves a child, with a ferocity that had no limit and no condition. And that love was the engine that drove him forward through the pain and the fire and the death. And beneath the love, deep and vast and terrifying, was something else. An ocean of controlled fury that stretched to the horizon and beyond. It was not the fury of a berserker. It was the fury of a guardian, the cold, implacable rage of a creature that has seen something precious threatened and has made a decision so deep and so final that it was not even a thought anymore, but a physical state of being. Nobody touches them. Nobody hurts them. Not while I'm standing. Tulin pulled back from the Marine's mind, shaking. His bioluminescent skin was blazing, brighter than it had been in weeks, and there were tears running down his face. They are not monsters, he whispered to the darkness. They are something far more dangerous. They are protectors. In orbit, the battle raged on. The Kravathi had lost nearly 600 ships in 11 hours. Their formation was in tatters. Their command structure was fractured. Sub-Overlord Thraval had ordered a fighting retreat to the outer system, trying to regroup, but the humans followed him like wolves following a wounded animal, harrying his flanks, picking off stragglers, never letting him rest. The watching galaxy was stunned. The live feeds from the battle were being broadcast across the Concord, and billions of beings on hundreds of worlds sat in silence, watching the impossible happen. Only a minor species, outnumbered and outgunned, was tearing apart one of the most powerful military forces in the galaxy, not through superior technology, not through superior numbers, through sheer tactical brilliance and an absolute refusal to stop fighting. On Elurus Prime, Archon Seluma watched from her private chambers. Her old face was unreadable, but her hands resting on her metal staff were trembling. I told them, she said to the empty room. I told them what would happen. In the outer system, Overlord Kethan received the battle reports with growing fury. This was not possible. These were humans. Soft, small, fragile creatures from a meaningless planet. They should not be capable of this. He made a decision. He opened a channel to every Korvathi commander in the Dominion, every fleet, every battle group, every warship. His message was short and absolute. All forces, converge on the Valeth system, maximum speed. We end this now. 8,000 warships began to move. On the bridge of the Unconquered, Admiral Mwangi received the intelligence report. Every Korvathi ship in the Dominion was heading for Valethar. The full weight of the Pale Dominion, all 8,000 warships, would arrive within days. His officers looked at him with expressions that ranged from concern to barely concealed fear. Mwangi read the report twice. Then he set it down and smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of a man who had set a trap and watched his prey walk into it with both eyes open. Good, he said quietly. Now they're all in one place. He turned to his communications officer. Get me a secure channel to the reserve fleet in the outer system. So tell Admiral Chen that Operation Jericho is go, and get me Captain Vasquez. The channel crackled. Vasquez's voice came through, rough with exhaustion and pain. Vasquez here. Captain, how are you? Alive, sir. The bombardment platforms are down. Ground operations are proceeding. The Korvathi on the surface are falling back. Good work, Rhea. Outstanding work. Now listen to me carefully. The Korvathi are bringing everything they have, all 8,000 ships. They'll be here in 3 days when the pause. Understood, sir. Are you afraid? Another pause, longer this time. When Vasquez spoke again, there was something in her voice that had nothing to do with fear. Sir, I watched those people hiding in basements. I watched their children trying not to glow because they were afraid of being found. I carried a Valeth girl to a medical station on my back, and she weighed less than my rifle, and she was shaking so hard I thought she would break apart in my hands. And the whole time, she kept saying the same thing in her language, over and over. I had it translated later. She was saying, please do not let them hurt me anymore. Vasquez's voice was steady. Rock steady. No, sir, I am not afraid. Let them come. Let them all come. We'll be ready. Mwangi closed the channel and stood alone on his bridge for a moment, looking out at the stars. Somewhere out there, 8,000 warships were racing toward them, the largest fleet the Korvathi had ever assembled. The largest battle the galaxy had ever seen was about to begin. He thought about the Valeth girl on Vasquez's back. He thought about her words. Please do not let them hurt me anymore. He turned to his crew. 3 days, he said. We have 3 days to prepare. I want every ship repaired, rearmed, and ready. I want every Marine on that surface dug in and fortified. I want every fighter fueled and every gun loaded. In 3 days, the Korvathi are going to throw everything they have at us. And in 3 days, we are going to show them what happens when you make humanity angry. He straightened his uniform. Get to work. They came out of faster-than-light space like a wall of iron and hate, and they darkened the stars. 8,000 warships. The full military might of the Korvathi Pale Dominion, assembled in one place for the first time in their species' history. Battle cruisers and destroyers and carriers and dreadnoughts. When arranged in a formation so vast that it took light itself nearly a minute to travel from one end to the other. At the center, larger than all the rest, sat the Fist of Purity, the personal flagship of Overlord Kethan, a vessel 3 kilometers long with enough firepower to crack a planet's crust. Kethan stood on his bridge and surveyed his fleet through the holographic display. Behind him, his officers worked in precise silence. The air smelled of metal and ozone, and the faint chemical scent of Korvathi confidence. Sensor report, he said. The human fleet is positioned in a defensive formation around Valethar, Overlord. Approximately 1,100 ships remain operational. They have established orbital defenses and ground fortifications. Their 4 large capital ships are arranged in a diamond pattern at the center of their formation. Kethan smiled. 1,100 against 8,000. Less than 1 to 7. Even accounting for the surprising ferocity the humans had shown in the initial engagement, the mathematics were overwhelming. This would not be a battle. It would be an execution. All ships, he said, advance, standard assault formation, weapons free on all human targets, leave no survivors. The Corvati armada began to move, and across the galaxy, billions watched. The live feed from the battle was being broadcast on every network in the Concorde. On Aluris Prime, the Grand Assembly had been reconvened, not for debate, but simply to watch. 400 species sat in the Great Crystal Hall and stared at the holographic displays, and most of them expected to witness the end of humanity's brief and foolish adventure in galactic warfare. On the bridge of the Unconquered, Admiral Jonah Mwangi watched the Corvati fleet approach. The display painted them as a sea of red dots, and so many that the individual markers blurred together into a solid wall of crimson. His own fleet was a thin blue line, a thread of color against an ocean of red. His officers were silent. The tension on the bridge was thick enough to taste. Every person in the room knew the numbers. Every person in the room knew what those numbers meant. Mwangi stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his face calm, his eyes steady. He had not slept in 36 hours. He had spent every moment of those hours preparing, planning, running simulations, reviewing intelligence, adjusting dispositions. He had done everything he could do. Now there was nothing left but the doing. Communication, as he said. Sir, open a channel. All frequencies unencrypted. Channel open, sir. Mwangi spoke, and his voice was broadcast to every ship in the system, human and Corvathi alike, and to every relay station that carried the feed to the watching galaxy. Overlord Kethayan, this is Admiral Mwangi. I am required by the laws of my people to offer you one final opportunity to withdraw your forces from this system. If you refuse, I will destroy your fleet. This is not a threat. It is a statement of fact. A pause. You are approaching with 8,000 ships. You believe this gives you an advantage? You are wrong. You have 8,000 ships because you need 8,000 ships. I have 1,100 because 1,100 is enough. Another pause. I await your response. The response came quickly. Kithan's voice was sharp with contempt. Human, you are brave, stupid but brave. I will remember your courage when I mount your skull on the prow of my ship. The Pale Dominion does not retreat. So be it, Mwangi said. He closed the channel and turned to his tactical officer. Execute Operation Jericho. Phase 1, Anvil. The human fleet tightened its formation around Valathar and waited. The Corvathi hit them like a hammer hitting a nail. The first wave of Corvathi fire was devastating. Plasma beams and missile salvos crashed against the human formation in a torrent of light and fury. Human ships shuddered under the impact. Shields flared and buckled. A corvette on the outer edge of the formation took a direct hit from a Corvathi battlecruiser and simply ceased to exist, replaced by a brief flash of white light and a cloud of expanding debris. The humans held. They held because Mwangi had positioned them perfectly. The defensive formation was not a wall but a web, with overlapping fields of fire and interlocking shield coverage. Ships that came under heavy fire rotated to the interior of the formation, while fresh ships took their place. Damaged vessels pulled back just far enough to make emergency repairs before returning to the line. The 4 dreadnoughts anchored the formation like mountains, their massive shields absorbing punishment that would have destroyed lesser ships, their heavy guns returning fire with methodical precision. The Corvathi pressed harder. They had numbers. Wherein they used them. Wave after wave of warships threw themselves against the human line, trying to find a crack, a weakness, a gap they could exploit. The space around Valathar filled with fire and wreckage and the spinning hulks of dead ships. Hours passed. The human fleet lost ships, a destroyer here, a frigate there. Each loss was 100 lives, snuffed out in an instant of fire and vacuum. But the line held. For every human ship destroyed, the overlapping defensive fire claimed 3 Corvathi vessels. The exchange rate was terrible for the Dominion, but Kethayan did not care. He had ships to spare. The humans did not. Maintain pressure, Kethayan ordered. They cannot hold forever. Grind them down. He was right. They could not hold forever. The human fleet was taking damage. Ships were burning. Crews were dying. The defensive formation was shrinking as vessels were destroyed or too damaged to fight. At the current rate of attrition, the human fleet would be annihilated within 12 hours. Admiral Mwangi knew this. He had planned for it. Phase 2, he said. The hammer. Signal Admiral Chen. Deep in the outer system, hidden behind the massive bulk of Valathar's gas giant, 400 human warships received the signal. They had been sitting in perfect darkness for over 3 weeks, running on minimal power, their engines cold, their systems silent, invisible to every sensor in the system. They were ghosts, patient, waiting ghosts. Admiral Chen, a small woman with iron-gray hair and a reputation for being the most aggressive fleet commander in the UESC, received the signal and smiled. All ships, she said, light the fires. We are going in. 400 engines ignited at once, and the ghost fleet screamed out from behind the gas giant like a spear thrown at the Korvathi's back. They hit the rear of the Korvathi formation at full speed, and the effect was catastrophic. The Korvathi, whose entire fleet was oriented forward toward the human defensive line, had nothing guarding their rear. The rearmost ships, supply vessels, and troop transports, and lightly armed support craft were destroyed in the first minutes. Fuel depots exploded. Ammunition stores detonated in chain reactions that took out the ships beside them. At the same time, prepositioned human stealth ships, tiny vessels no larger than shuttles that had been drifting in the debris fields of the earlier battle, activated their systems and began transmitting false orders on Korvathi command frequencies. Korvathi captains received contradictory instructions. Some were told to turn and face the new threat. Others were told to hold position. Others were told to retreat. The result was chaos. And then Phase 3 began. The song. Every human ship in the system, all 1,500 of them, activated their external broadcast systems simultaneously. They broadcast on every frequency, every band, every channel. They filled the electromagnetic spectrum from one end to the other with sound. It was not a weapon in the traditional sense. It was not a jamming signal or a coded message or a tactical communication. It was music, human music. It started with drums, deep, thundering drums that pounded like the heartbeat of something enormous and ancient. African war drums, played in patterns that human armies had used for thousands of years to march into battle. The rhythm was primal, irresistible, a sound that reached into the deepest part of the brain and grabbed hold of something older than language. Then the pipes joined in. Scottish Highland pipes, their high, keening wail cutting through the thunder of the drums like a blade through cloth. The sound was mournful and fierce at the same time. The sound of a people who had fought in the mist and the rain for centuries and had never, ever given up. Then the voices. A Maori haka, the war dance of the warriors of New Zealand, performed by hundreds of throats in perfect unison. The words were ancient, the language of a people who had crossed the largest ocean on earth in wooden canoes and survived. The chant was a challenge, a declaration, a promise. We are here. We are not afraid. Come and face us if you dare. And over it all, rising above the drums and the pipes and the voices like a wave cresting before it breaks, came the orchestra. Strings and brass and woodwinds, playing music that humans had composed centuries ago, but that still had the power to make hearts race and blood surge and tears fall. The Ride of the Valkyries, Mars, the bringer of war, the Requiem. Music written by people who understood violence and beauty in the terrible place where the two met. The sound filled every Korvathi ship. It poured through their communication systems, through their speakers, through the very walls of their vessels. It was everywhere. It was inescapable. And the Korvathi could not handle it. The Korvathi communicated partially through sonic resonance. Sound was not just a sense for them. It was a language, a means of establishing dominance and submission, hierarchy and order. Their entire social structure was built on patterns of sound, and the sounds pouring through their ships were nothing they had ever heard before. The drums hit frequencies that triggered deep brain fear responses. The pipes produced harmonics that confused their sonic communication systems. The haka triggered territorial alarm signals that their biology interpreted as the approach of an apex predator. Corvette officers on dozens of ships began to panic. Some covered their hearing organs and screamed. Others froze, their bodies locked in place by conflicting neural signals. Some simply broke and ran, abandoning their stations and fleeing through the corridors of their own ships. The effect cascaded through the fleet like a disease. Ship after ship fell out of formation, their crews unable to function, their command structures dissolving. Overlord Cathan, on the bridge of the Fist of Purity, slammed his four fists against his command console so hard that the metal cracked. "Silence it," he roared. "Block the frequencies. Override the communication systems." His officers scrambled to obey, but the human broadcasts were overwhelming. Every time they blocked one frequency, the humans shifted to another. The electronic warfare frigates in the human fleet were specifically designed for this, constantly adapting their broadcasts, finding new channels, new frequencies, new ways to fill the Corvathi ships with sound. Cathan was not affected as badly as his crew. He was old, battle-hardened, his neural pathways reinforced by decades of combat conditioning, but even he could feel it. The drums rattled his bones. The pipes made his vision blur. The voices, those terrible human voices raised in unified challenge, stirred something in the ancient parts of his brain that whispered, "Run, run. There is something here that is bigger than you." He crushed that whisper with an effort of pure will. "All ships," he snarled into the fleet channel, forcing his voice through the interference. "Phase 4 is coming. Brace yourselves. This changes nothing. We still outnumber them. Push forward and destroy them." But Phase 4 was not his. Phase 4 belonged to Mwangi, the kill. Admiral Mwangi stood on the bridge of the Unconquered and watched the Corvathi fleet through his tactical display. It was exactly where he wanted it. Committed to the battle around Valathar, unable to withdraw because Admiral Chen's fleet was behind them. Their supply lines were cut. Their communication was in chaos. Their crews were being driven to the edge of madness by the song. They were pinned, surrounded, confused, and afraid. Now it was time to finish it. "All ships," Mwangi said, and his voice was very calm, very steady, the voice of a man who had made his peace with what was about to happen. "General advance. All weapons free. No formation. Fight your own fights. Take them apart." The human fleet surged forward, and what followed was not a battle. It was a reckoning. The disciplined defensive formation dissolved into 1,000 individual actions, each human ship finding its own target, its own angle, its own way to kill. The wolfpacks of corvettes dove into the gaps in the Corvathi formation and tore through the disorganized ships from the inside. Destroyers paired up and caught Corvathi battle cruisers in crossfires that turned them into burning wreckage. Fighters swarmed Corvathi carriers, slipping through their weakened point defenses and putting torpedoes into their flight decks. The 4 dreadnoughts led the charge. The Unconquered pushed through the center of the Corvathi formation like a fist through glass, her heavy guns firing in all directions, her shields absorbing hit after hit. The Defiant drove into the left flank. The Remembrance took the right. The last argument, the oldest of the 4, battered and scarred from the earlier fighting, plunged into the thickest concentration of Corvathi ships and fought with the fury of something that knew it was dying and wanted to make every second count. And the humans fought with everything they had. A destroyer with no engines left, her drive section destroyed by a Corvathi torpedo, used her remaining maneuvering thrusters to turn herself broadside to a Corvathi battlecruiser and fired her main gun until the barrel glowed white and then red and then warped and melted. Then she detonated her own reactor core. The explosion consumed the destroyer and the battlecruiser and 4 other Corvathi ships that were too close to escape. A fighter pilot whose craft had been disabled ejected into space, then manually activated the self-destruct on her fighter by remote, timing the explosion to catch a Corvathi corvette that was passing overhead. She floated in the vacuum afterward, in nothing but her flight suit, breathing recycled air, waiting to be picked up. She was rescued 3 hours later. She asked if they had won yet. An engineering team on the frigate Steadfast sealed themselves in a compartment that had been breached by a Corvathi plasma beam. They vented the atmosphere from their own section to seal the breach, then worked in their vacuum suits for 40 minutes to restore power to the main gun. The gun fired for another 2 hours. When the battle was over and rescue teams reached the Steadfast, they found the engineering team still at their posts, still in their suits. 3 of them had died from radiation exposure during the repair. And the other 4 had continued working beside the bodies of their friends. Captain Ria Vasquez and the Guadalcanal were in the thick of it. The destroyer had been patched up during the 3 days of preparation, but she was still wounded, still scarred, her hull pocked with the marks of the earlier battle. Vasquez drove her ship into the Corvathi formation like a knife and fought with the precision and savagery that had already made her a legend. She killed 14 Corvathi ships in 4 hours. Her crew later said that she never raised her voice during the entire battle. She gave her orders in the same calm, steady tone that she used to order coffee in the officer's mess. Turn port, fire main batteries, reload, turn starboard, fire again, brace for impact, damage report, resume fire. The Corvathi fleet died. It died not all at once, but in pieces, like a great beast brought down by 1,000 wounds. The outer ships were destroyed first, picked off by human wolf packs. Then the middle ranks crumbled as the dreadnoughts pushed through them. Then the inner formations, the strongest ships, the flagships and command vessels, found themselves surrounded and alone. Overlord Kithan watched his fleet die on the holographic display. The sea of red dots that had filled the screen hours ago was shrinking, breaking apart, dissolving into scattered clusters of survivors surrounded by an ocean of blue. His 8,000 ships had become 5,000, then 3,000, then 1,000. He had sent the order to surrender 40 minutes ago. Nobody had responded. The communication system was destroyed. The song still played through every speaker on the Fist of Purity, and his crew was scattered through the ship, some hiding, some catatonic, some simply sitting on the floor with their hands over their hearing organs, rocking back and forth. Kithan stood alone on his bridge. The holographic display showed fewer than 300 Corvathi ships still operational, and they were running, scattering in every direction, fleeing at maximum speed, abandoning their overlord and their cause and their pride. He stood there and watched the end of everything he had built. Then the Unconquered appeared on his viewport, filling it from edge to edge, 9 kilometers of dark gray hull sliding past like the belly of some leviathan from the deep. And behind it, smaller, faster, came a single destroyer with a name painted on her hull in white letters. Adies SV Guadalcanal. The destroyer matched speed with the Fist of Purity and locked on with docking clamps. Kithan heard the deep metallic thud of the connection through the hull of his ship, and then the sound of something cutting through the outer airlock. Minutes later, the door to his bridge opened. Human Marines walked in. They wore heavy armor that was scorched and dented and stained with blood that was both red and green. Their weapons were raised, their movements controlled and professional. They swept the bridge, secured the exits, and took up positions around the room with the smooth efficiency of soldiers who had done this 1,000 times. And then, through the door, came a woman. She was not tall. She was not imposing. She was covered in dust and dried blood, some of it hers and some of it not. Her armor was cracked in 3 places. Her left arm hung at an angle that suggested something was broken underneath the plating. A bandage was wrapped around her head, brown with dried blood, and her eyes dark and hard and burning with something that was not hatred, but was not mercy either. Fixed on the Corvathi overlord with the focus of a predator that has cornered its prey. Captain Ria Vasquez walked across the bridge and stopped 3 meters from Overlord Kithan. Kithan looked at her. She was half his height, a quarter of his mass, a fragile, soft-bodied creature from a world he had dismissed as insignificant. "What are you?" he asked. It was not a rhetorical question. He genuinely did not understand. He had fought wars his entire life. He had conquered worlds and subjugated species and built an empire that spanned 100 star systems. He understood power. He understood strength. He understood the mathematics of war. He did not understand this. He did not understand how this small, broken, bleeding creature and her kind had done what they had done. How they had crossed the galaxy for strangers. How they had fought against impossible odds and won. How they had absorbed punishment that should have destroyed them and kept fighting and kept fighting and kept fighting until there was nothing left to fight. "What are you?" he asked again. Vasquez looked at him for a long moment. Then she reached up and removed her cracked helmet. Her face was young and old at the same time. aged by days of combat and sleeplessness, but her eyes were clear. We're the ones who answered, she said. Then she stepped forward, pulled his ceremonial blade from his belt, and laid it on the command console between them. Your fleet is gone, she said. Your empire is over. You can surrender, or you can pick that up, and we can finish this. Your choice. Cathan looked at the blade. He looked at the ruined display showing the scattered remains of his fleet. He looked at the human marines standing around his bridge, their weapons steady, their eyes flat and patient. He left the blade on the console. I surrender, he said. Vasquez nodded. She turned to her marines. Secure the ship. Get medical teams aboard. Treat the wounded, ours and theirs. Then she walked to the viewport and looked out at the battlefield. The space around Valethar was filled with wreckage. Thousands of ships, human and Korvathi, reduced to twisted metal and drifting debris. Fires burned in the vacuum, fed by leaking oxygen, flickering out as the air was consumed. Bodies floated among the wreckage, small and still and terribly numerous. She stood there for a long time, looking at the cost. Then she activated her communicator. Admiral Mwangi, this is Vasquez. The Fist of Purity is secured. Overlord Kethayan has surrendered. The Korvathi fleet is gone, sir. It's over. On the bridge of the Unconquered, Mwangi received the report. He closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, they were wet. Casualties? He asked. Still counting, sir. It's a lot. I know, he said quietly. I know it is. He opened a channel to the surface of Valethar. Not to the shelters and the ruins and the survivors who had been listening to the thunder of the battle above their heads for hours, not knowing which side was winning, not knowing if the fire was about to fall again. Ambassador Tulin, he said, this is Admiral Mwangi. A long pause, then Tulin's voice, thin and trembling and disbelieving. Admiral, your skies are clear, Ambassador. The Korvathi fleet has been destroyed. Your world is safe. Another pause, longer this time. And then faintly in the background of the transmission, Mwangi heard something. It was the sound of Valeth voices, hundreds of them, thousands of them, rising from the shelters and the ruins and the darkness. They were not cheering. The Valeth did not cheer. They were singing, a Valeth morning song that was also a song of gratitude. A melody so pure and so heartbreaking that it crossed the boundaries of species and language and reached directly into the heart. Tulin's voice came again, broken with tears. Admiral, why? Why did you come for us when no one else would? Mwangi stood on his bridge, surrounded by his exhausted crew, in a ship scarred with battle damage, orbiting a world that was not his, in a star system that was not his, at the end of a battle that had cost his species more lives than any single engagement in human history. He thought about it for a moment. Because someone had to, he said, and we could. On Alurus Prime, in the Grand Assembly, 400 species sat in perfect silence. The holographic displays showed the aftermath of the battle. The vast Korvathi armada reduced to scattered wreckage. The human fleet, battered and bleeding but still there, still holding, still standing guard over a world that was not theirs. Archon Saluma sat in her seat and wept. Not from sorrow, though there was sorrow in her tears. Not from joy, though there was joy too. She wept because she had been right. And being right about this, about the terrible and beautiful and unstoppable nature of humanity, was not something that brought comfort. She wept because the galaxy had changed, and it would never change back. Archon Keth sat beside her, his massive stone face unreadable, but his hands resting on his knees were trembling. For the first time in 6,000 years, the oldest and most powerful being in the galactic concord was afraid, not of the humans, of what the humans had shown him about himself, about his concord, about the comfortable, careful, and the cowardly civilization they had built, a civilization that could watch genocide and calculate the cost of intervention and decide it was too expensive. The humans had shown them what courage looked like, and it was terrifying. 6 months after the Battle of Valethar, the galaxy was still trying to understand what had happened. The numbers were staggering. The Korvathi Pale Dominion had entered the battle with 8,000 warships and left with fewer than 300, most of which were captured in the weeks that followed as they tried to limp back to Corvathi space. Over 2 million Corvathi soldiers were dead. Their fleet infrastructure was destroyed. Their supply chains were severed. Their high commander was a prisoner of war. The human cost was terrible too. 42,000 human lives lost. To 360 ships destroyed. 90 more damaged beyond repair. Every human family on every colony had someone who did not come home. The memorial lists were long and heavy with names, but the galaxy did not focus on the numbers. The galaxy focused on the story, and the story spread like fire through dry grass, carried by news feeds and diplomatic channels and whispered conversations on 1,000 worlds. The story of a dying species that cried for help, of a galaxy that refused to listen, and of a young, small, unremarkable species from an unremarkable world that crossed half the galaxy to fight for strangers because it was the right thing to do. The galactic concord would never be the same. On Alurus Prime, the Grand Assembly convened for what the diplomatic corps called the most important session in 6,000 years. The Crystal Hall was full to capacity. Every species was represented, every seat was filled, and the air hummed with a tension that had nothing to do with trade agreements or border disputes. The human delegation entered the hall, and the assembly fell silent. They had been assigned seats in the back, in the section reserved for minor species, just as they had been since their admission 12 cycles ago. But as the human delegates walked down the aisle toward their usual places, something happened. Archon Siluma, the ancient elder who had tried to warn the triumvirate and been ignored, rose from her seat at the front of the hall and spoke in a voice that carried to every corner of the chamber. "The human delegation will sit at the center," she said. "They have earned it." There was a moment of silence. Then slowly, one by one, the delegations that occupied the central seats stood and moved aside. The Fenari, who had voted for intervention and whose 60 warships had joined the human fleet in the final days of the battle, led the way. The Selari followed. Then the Kelthine, the Morvan, the Drossic, and a dozen others. By the time the human delegates reached the center of the hall, a path had opened for them, lined on both sides by standing aliens who said nothing, but whose silence spoke louder than any words. Captain Ria Vasquez, now wearing the rank insignia of Commodore, walked at the head of the human delegation. Her left arm was still in a regeneration cast. She walked with a slight limp from a fracture that had not fully healed. Her dress uniform was new, but the woman inside it was scarred in ways that the uniform could not cover. She took her seat at the center of the Galactic Assembly and looked up at the crystal ceiling and the stars beyond it. She did not smile. She was thinking of the people who should have been sitting beside her and were not. The crew of the Steadfast, the pilots who had ejected into the void, the Marines who had died on the streets of Maelavan with Valith children behind them. The session began. Archon Keth, chief speaker of the triumvirate, stood before the assembly. He looked diminished. He was still enormous, still carved from stone, still ancient and powerful. But something in his bearing had changed. The absolute certainty that had defined him for centuries was gone, replaced by something heavier and more honest. 6 months ago, he said, this assembly was asked for help. We were asked to save a species from extinction, and we refused. We refused because we were afraid of the cost. We refused because the mathematics of intervention did not favor us. We refused because it was easier to do nothing than to do something. He paused. We were wrong. The hall was utterly silent. While we debated and calculated and protected our comfort, the humans did what we should have done. They crossed the galaxy. They fought against impossible odds. They bled and died for people they had never met, on a world they had never seen, because they believed that when someone cries for help, you answer. Not because it is easy. Not because the numbers are favorable. Because it is right. He turned and looked directly at the human delegation. We owe the humans a debt that cannot be repaid. But more than that, we owe them an apology. Not for failing to help the Valith, though that failure is a stain on this body that will not be easily washed away. We owe them an apology for underestimating them, for dismissing them, for looking at their youth and their small numbers and their violent history and seeing only primitives, when we should have seen what they truly are. He paused again, And when he spoke, his voice was soft, almost reverent. They are what we forgot how to be. The assembly stirred. Delegates shifted in their seats. Some nodded, some looked away, unable to meet the eyes of the human delegation. Then Tulin spoke. Ambassador Tulin of the Valeth rose from his seat, and the assembly went quiet again. He was changed. The frail, flickering creature who had collapsed on the speaking platform 6 months ago was gone. His bioluminescent skin glowed with a steady, warm light. He was still small, still fragile, still everything the Valeth had always been. But there was something new in his eyes, a hardness that was not cruelty, but clarity, the look of someone who had seen the worst the universe had to offer and had survived it. My people are alive, he said. Not all of them. We lost 4 million lives. 4 million. That number will haunt us for generations. But we are alive, and we are alive because the humans came for us. He turned to face the human delegation. I want to tell you what happened after the battle. I want to tell you what the humans did after the fighting was over, because this is the part that the galaxy needs to understand. He stepped forward to the central platform, the same platform where he had broken the telepathic crystal and made the assembly feel the screams of his dying people. After the battle, the human soldiers came to our shelters. They came with medical supplies and food and water and blankets. They came with engineers who began rebuilding our power systems within hours of the last shot being fired. They came with doctors who learned our biology on the fly, who studied our physiology from data pads while stitching up our wounds, who held our hands and spoke to us in broken Valeth because they had spent their off-duty hours trying to learn our language. His voice was steady, but his eyes were bright with tears. Conrad, I watched a human marine, a woman named Corporal Elena Torres, carry a Valeth elder through the ruins of Melavan on her back. The elder was blind. She had lost her sight when a plasma blast struck the building she was hiding in. She was terrified. She could not see, could not understand what was happening around her, could only hear the sounds of rubble and machinery and voices in a language she did not know. She was shaking so hard that Corporal Torres had to hold her with both arms to keep her from falling. And Corporal Torres talked to her, the whole way, in English, which the elder could not understand, but it did not matter. Torres talked to her the way a mother talks to a frightened child. She said, I have got you. You are safe. Nobody's going to hurt you. I am right here. I am not going anywhere. Because she said these things over and over in a steady, gentle voice, while she carried an alien woman she had never met through the ruins of a city she had never seen on a planet she had traveled across the galaxy to save. Tylen's bioluminescent skin blazed. That is who the humans are. They are not just warriors. They are not just the species that destroyed 8,000 warships and brought the Pale Dominion to its knees. They are the species that carries the blind and the broken through the rubble and talks to them in gentle voices. They are the species that fights with unimaginable fury, and then, the moment the fighting stops, begins to heal. He turned back to the assembly. The violence and the tenderness are not separate things. They come from the same place. The humans protect because they love, and they destroy because they love. And if you cannot understand how those two things can exist in the same heart, then you do not understand humanity, and you never will. He returned to his seat. The assembly was silent. In the days that followed, the work of reshaping the galaxy began. The Korvathi Pale Dominion collapsed. Without their fleet, without their high commander, without the military infrastructure that had held their empire together, the Dominion fragmented into dozens of competing factions. Regional warlords fought each other for control. Colonies declared independence. The Korvathi species, which had been unified by conquest for centuries, was suddenly and violently alone. Several Korvathi worlds petitioned the Galactic Concord for membership, not because they agreed with the Concord's values, but because they were afraid. Afraid of each other, and afraid of what the humans might do if the Korvathi ever gave them a reason to come back. The question of what to do with the Korvathi was the subject of intense debate. Many species wanted punishment, reparations, territorial concessions. Some called for the complete disarmament and occupation of Korvathi space. A few called for worse. The humans argued for mercy. Admiral Mwangi, now promoted to Fleet Admiral and serving as the senior military advisor to the Human Diplomatic Corps, addressed the assembly on the subject. He wore his dress uniform, and on his chest, alongside his campaign medals, he wore a small pin that the Valeth had given him. It was shaped like a flame, and it glowed with the same soft bioluminescence as Valeth's skin. The Valeth had no medals for military valor. They had never needed them. So they had created one, just for him, and the word engraved on it in Valeth's script translated roughly to the one who came. I understand the desire for punishment, Mwangi told the assembly. Believe me, I understand it. I lost 42,000 of my people at Valethar. I signed the letters to their families. I know the cost of what the Korvathi did, and I know the cost of stopping them. He paused. But we did not cross the galaxy to become the next Korvathi. We did not lose 42,000 lives so that we could build an empire on the graves of those who wronged us. We came to stop a genocide. We came to protect the helpless. And if we respond to the fall of the Dominion with vengeance and occupation, then we have already lost. We have become the thing we fought against. He looked around the hall. The Korvathi are a broken people. Their empire is gone. Their fleet is gone. Their identity is shattered. They need help, not punishment. They need to be shown that there is a way to exist in this galaxy that does not depend on domination and fear. They need what the Valeth needed 6 months ago. They need someone to reach out a hand. The assembly voted. It was not unanimous. Several species voted against mercy, and their reasons were not unreasonable. But the motion passed, and the Galactic Concord committed to a program of reconstruction and reintegration for the Korvathi worlds. Archon Saluma was appointed as the chief liaison between the Concord and the human delegation. It was a position of enormous influence, and she approached it with the same sharp-eyed pragmatism that had defined her warnings before the battle. In her first private meeting with Admiral Mwangi, she sat across from him in a small room on Iluris Prime and studied his face. He looked older than he had in the intelligence files she had reviewed months ago. The battle had aged him, as battles always did. His hair was grayer, his eyes were heavier, but his hands, resting on the table between them, were steady. I need to ask you a question, she said, and I need an honest answer. Ask, Mwangi said. Should we be afraid of you? Mwangi did not answer immediately. He sat in the quiet room and considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. Through the window behind Saluma, the stars burned in the eternal dark. Somewhere out there, human ships were patrolling the former Korvathi border. Human aid workers were rebuilding Valeth cities. Human diplomats were negotiating the terms of the new galactic charter. Humanity was everywhere now, woven into the fabric of galactic society in a way that could never be undone. That depend, he said finally. On what? On you, on the conquered. On what kind of galaxy you want to build. He leaned forward. We are not conquerors, Archon. We did not come here to rule. We do not want an empire. We have had empires on our own world, and they were terrible things, and we tore them down. What we want is simple. We want a galaxy where nobody has to die because nobody would help them. We want a galaxy where the strong protect the weak, not because it is profitable, not because it is convenient, but because it is right. He paused. If that is the galaxy you are building, then you have nothing to fear from us. We will be your partners, your allies, your friends, and we will share what we have and learn what we do not know and work beside you for as long as it takes. His voice hardened just slightly. But if someone cries for help and the Concord does nothing again, if another species is left to burn while this assembly calculates the cost of intervention, then yes, Archon, you should be afraid. Because we will come. We will always come, and we will not be polite about it. Saluma held his gaze for a long time. Then she nodded slowly. I believe you, she said. The new Galactic Compact was drafted over the following months. It replaced the old Concord Charter, which had governed the galaxy for 6,000 years, with a new document that was shorter, simpler, and infinitely more powerful. Its central clause were proposed by Ambassador Tulin of the Valeth and seconded by Fleet Admiral Mwangi of the UESC, read as follows. No species shall cry for aid unanswered. To hear suffering and choose silence is to be complicit in its cause. The members of this compact pledge to defend the helpless, to answer the call of those in need, and to stand together against those who would destroy the innocent. It passed unanimously. Nobody in the assembly mentioned the obvious subtext that every delegate who voted yes was thinking about what would happen if someone voted no and the humans found out. But it was there, unspoken, like gravity. The humans had not threatened anyone. They had not demanded anything. They had simply shown the galaxy what they were willing to do for strangers, and the galaxy had drawn its own conclusions. On Valithar, where the rebuilding continued, human construction teams worked alongside Valith engineers to rebuild the destroyed cities. The designs were collaborative, blending Valith aesthetics with human structural engineering, and the results were beautiful. Towers of crystal and steel rose from the ruins, stronger than what had come before, built to withstand the kind of destruction that had nearly ended the Valith species. Human doctors established a permanent medical mission on the planet. Valith scholars began studying human history and culture, fascinated by the species that had saved them. Cultural exchange programs sent young Valith to Earth and young humans to Valithar. The two species, so different in every physical way, found in each other something unexpected: a mirror. The Valith saw in humanity the fierce protectiveness they had never possessed but desperately needed. The humans saw in the Valith the gentle wisdom and empathy that they sometimes forgot they were fighting for. Tulin and Vasquez became unlikely friends. The telepath and the soldier, the pacifist and the warrior, met regularly on Valithar and on Alurus Prime. They talked for hours about their species, their histories, their hopes and fears. Tulin once asked Vasquez how she could live with the violence, how she could sleep at night knowing the things she had done, the ships she had destroyed, the lives she had taken. Vasquez thought about it for a while. "I don't always sleep well," she admitted. "Some nights I see the fire, some nights I hear the sounds, but then I think about that girl, the one I carried on my back during the ground assault, the one who weighed less than my rifle. I think about her, and I think about the fact that she is alive, that she is growing up, that she will have a life, a full life, because we came. And that is enough. That is enough to let me sleep." Thielen touched her hand. Through the contact, he felt the truth of what she said. The pain and the peace, intertwined, inseparable. The cost and the reward. "You are remarkable creatures," he said. Vasquez smiled. It was a tired smile, a soldier's smile, but it was real. "We are just people," she said. "Just people who could not sit still while someone was hurting." The story ends on Earth. Fleet Admiral Jonah Mwangi stood before the memorial wall. It had been built on a hilltop overlooking the sea, and in a place where the wind blew steady and clean, and the grass grew green all year round. The wall was long and white and smooth, and carved into its surface were 42,000 names. Each name was small, precisely cut, and when the sunlight hit the wall at the right angle, the letters seemed to glow. Mwangi stood before it in silence. He had been standing there for a long time. His uniform was crisp and his metal shone, but his shoulders were bowed with a weight that no rank or honor could lift. Commodore Vasquez stood beside him. Her arm was out of the regeneration cast now, and she stood straight and tall, but her eyes, when they looked at the wall, held the same weight. Behind them, a young cadet approached. He was fresh from the academy, his uniform still stiff with newness, his eyes still bright with the idealism that time and war had not yet dimmed. He stopped a respectful distance away and waited. Mwangi noticed him. "Something on your mind, cadet?" The young man hesitated, then spoke. "Sir, do you think they will ever test us again? The Korvathi or someone else? Do you think we will have to do this again?" Mwangi looked at the wall. 42,000 names. 42,000 stories that ended too soon. Sons and daughters, mothers and fathers, friends and lovers and strangers who had boarded ships and crossed the galaxy and given everything they had for people they had never met. "Someone always does, son," he said. "That is the nature of things. There will always be someone who thinks they can take what is not theirs, hurt those who cannot fight back, build their power on the suffering of others. It has always been this way, on Earth and out there among the stars." He placed his hand on the wall. The stone was warm from the sun. "That is why we train," he said. "That is why we remember. And that is why, when the call comes," he pressed his palm flat against the names of the dead, "we answer." The wind blew across the hilltop, carrying the smell of salt and grass and the faint, distant sound of the sea. The sun moved slowly across the sky, and the shadows of the three figures stretched long across the green grass. Behind them, Earth turned on its axis, blue and green and white, scarred and beautiful, the cradle of a species that had clawed its way out of the mud and the blood and the darkness and reached for the stars. And across the galaxy, on 100 different worlds, in 100 different languages, a new story was being told. It was told in homes and schools and gathering places, told by parents to children, by elders to young ones, by teachers to students. The details varied from species to species, but the core was always the same. On the Valith worlds, the story was told in song, in the pure, luminous tones of a species that had almost been silenced forever. On the Fennery worlds, it was told with fierce pride, because the Fennery had been among the few who had voted to help and among the fewer who had sent ships to fight alongside the humans in the final days. On the Korvati worlds, it was told quietly as a cautionary tale, a reminder of what happens when power is used to destroy instead of protect. But everywhere in every version, the ending was the same. It went like this. If you are ever lost, if you are ever afraid, if the darkness comes and no one will help, look to the stars and call for the humans. They will come. They always come.